It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck, Episode 5, How to Think Statistically as an Actor.
It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Hauck. Turn your passion into income, Ben will show you how. With all the resources that you need to make it as an actor in an expensive city. To stay balanced and make money, you really can't go wrong with actingincome.com.
Welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. I'm Ben Hauck, and on this podcast, we talk about acting, money, balance, and tons of other topics related to earning an income as an actor. I want to thank you for tuning in. This is episode 5, titled How to Think Statistically as an Actor. Pull up the show notes right now at actingincome.com/episode 5. Now, before we dig in, I want to thank today's sponsor, my book, Long-Form Improv. Long-form improv deftly teaches the wildly popular form of improvisation that is so foundational to the comedy stylings of many of today's top actors and thriving comedians. Crammed with innovative ideas for conceptualizing improvised scene work and finding the game of the scene, this crisply written manual covers techniques for experienced improvisers, curious actors, and even non-actors, even teaching the most famous expression of long-form improv, the half-hour improvised form known as the Herald. Students of acting and improv alike should expect the book Long-Form Improv to bolster their education and fast-track their course to improv greatness. To reserve your copy today, also available on Kindle and Nook, go to actingincome.com/LFI. This episode is about how to think statistically as an actor. And this is a little something I developed for myself to help keep me from freaking out in those times when my acting work has diminished or slowed down. I also use it to think about my future acting work to get a sense of what I might expect. Thinking statistically for me is basically just looking at the average amount of work I've had over a period of time and using that as a gauge for what I can expect in a future time. Let me give you an example from my own acting career. I really like working on commercials. If you work even just background on a commercial, it can be a lot of money that it pays. So I took an interest in figuring out the frequency of my commercial work. One year, I think I worked 4 commercials over the course of the year. So to figure out how often I work on commercials, I could just do a little bit of math. 12 months divided by 4 commercials equals 1 commercial every 3 months. That was one way to think statistically. Statistically, I book a commercial every 3 months. So that gave me some sense not only descriptively of my past, it also gave me some sense prospectively about what I might expect as in going forward. So the next year, I had this sense that I'll probably book 1 commercial every 3 months. And sure enough, that seemed to bear out. I never knew exactly when I would work in that period of time on a commercial, but one would crop up. Then I signed up with a commercial background casting office, and I was forced to think statistically in a completely different way. In signing up with the commercial background casting office, what would happen was that I would get called to check my availability on a given future date to see if I was available for a particular commercial. That would happen pretty frequently, and of those times, usually I would never be called to book the job. It was just an availability check, and eventually I wouldn't book the job. But every once in a while, I would land a commercial when they check my availability. So I started to think statistically about these availability checks, and I tried to figure out about how many times I would actually book a job given a certain amount of availability checks. For myself, I don't know what the statistic I figured out was. It was maybe about 1 in 5 availability checks would lead to a booking. And then I noticed that that statistic was changing, that instead of every 1 in 5 leading to a booking, it was 1 in 4 or 1 in 3. Or then I noticed over a summer when it was really, really busy that my booking percentage went up to be I was working about 1 commercial a week. That was a really, really good time. I noticed that my statistics seemed to grow over the course of that year. It went from 1 every 3 months to I think once a month to then once nearly every week. That was a really exciting time. So I was thinking statistically, and that information was helpful that summer because then I looked into the next week and thought, how much work do I need to go for that week? Will I have a commercial that will help offset any days off? That was a very helpful way to gauge that summer and what kind of work I took. Now, you can't be lazy and think that your statistic is always going to be true. You have to sometimes reevaluate the situation to see if your statistics still apply. That year was a really interesting one for me because I noticed before Labor Day, I was booking about 1 commercial a week. And after Labor Day, squat. There was nothing coming. I wasn't exactly sure why. If I recall correctly, I think there was a shift in weather. I thought, well, maybe the summer months meant that commercials could happen, and once it got colder, they weren't going to happen. I didn't really know. Whatever the case, I couldn't rely on commercials anymore because my statistics were changing, and I wasn't sure when I would book my next commercial. So, how can you use statistical thinking as an actor? Well, you can use it just as I used it. If you're ever in a period where you've been working and suddenly the work drops off, you might freak out. You might think, oh my gosh, I'm never going to work again. Here's how you can think statistically. First, choose the particular event that you're freaking out about, whether it be an acting job, a voiceover job, a commercial, or whatever. And then choose a period of time, whether it be 1 month, 1 year, 3 months, 2 years, whatever. And then ask yourself, how many times over that period did you book that particular event, that particular job? That will be your booking frequency, i.e. your statistic. So let's say you booked 3 voiceovers over the course of a year, then every few months, every 4 months, you should expect a voiceover job. That's your statistic. And using that, you can move forward and say, you know what, in this coming year, I'm probably going to book about 3 voiceover jobs. You can also use that, though, that statistic, as to light a little fire under your buns to get you working to increase that statistic. Maybe there's something you can do about that. Maybe there's not, but that statistic may give you some sense of sanity when you're going forward, and may give you some sense of order and structure as you go forward, realizing that in some way the universe is conspiring to get you these kinds of jobs in this amount of time. Now, granted, there is no guarantee that the past is going to dictate the future, that just because you booked 5 commercials last year means you're going to book 5 the next year. You could go from 5 to 0. You could go from 5 to 15. You don't really know. The thing is, you may have a certain average amount of time that you've worked, and that statistic may have some bearing over your life, which may be interesting and may help calm you down, especially in those times when you're sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, where is all the acting work? That's your lesson for today. I hope you can employ some thinking statistically in those times when you're out of work, or when you're looking forward about what you might expect in the coming months. And that's this episode. This episode was sponsored by the book Longform Improv, the complete guide to creating characters, sustaining scenes, and performing extraordinary heralds by Ben Hauck. Reserve your copy today at actingincome.com/LFI. The show notes for this episode are available at actingincome.com/episode 5. You can find Acting Income on Twitter and Facebook. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, check out actingincome.com/advertise. I'm Ben Hauck. Thanks. See you on the next episode. For more information, as always, check out actingincome.com.